The scope's reticle danced in the heat shimmer. 2,300 yards of empty air between Eleanor Garrison and the target. Sweat stung her eyes despite the altitude's thin cold. The wind had shifted again, 18 miles per hour, gusting to 24, swirling through the mountain valley like a living thing with malice in its heart. "Garrison, we need that shot now!" Commander Brennan's voice crackled through her earpiece, tight with urgency she'd never heard from him before. 6 men pinned down. You're their only chance. Elle's finger rested against the trigger of the M2010, feeling the machined curve of metal that separated intention from action. Through the loopholed scope, she could see muzzle flash from enemy positions. Taliban fighters pouring fire onto her teammates, trapped in a kill zone with nowhere to run. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, clear as the day he'd spoken it. "When everything's on the line, let the world fade away. Just you, the rifle, and the target. Everything else is noise." She exhaled slowly, waiting for the space between heartbeats where the rifle would be steadiest. The trigger broke clean. The world held its breath. The morning sun turned San Diego Bay into molten copper as Eleanor Garrison stepped onto the tarmac at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The Pacific stretched endless to the west, and everywhere around her was the purposeful movement of warriors preparing for violence. The rhythm of a war machine that never truly stopped, even in peacetime. She was 24 years old, 5'3", 120 pounds of determination wrapped in Navy working uniform that still smelled factory fresh. The duffel bag over her shoulder contained everything she owned that mattered. Worn running shoes with 500 miles on them, her father's dog tags on a chain she never removed, and a photograph of a man in desert camouflage holding a newborn girl with infinite gentleness in his battle-scarred hands. Master Chief Thomas Garrison had died 11 years ago in a valley in Afghanistan, covering the extract of his team with precision rifle fire until a Taliban round found the gap in his body armor. The Medal of Honor had been awarded posthumously. Elle had been 14, standing in Arlington National Cemetery in a black dress that didn't fit right, watching them fold the flag with mechanical precision while her world collapsed into a singularity of grief. Now she was here to finish what he'd started. "Corporal Garrison," a Navy chief approached, clipboard in hand, expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he'd already formed opinions. "Welcome to Team 7. Commander Brennan wants to see you immediately." Elle followed him across the compound, past obstacle courses where operators ran in full kit, past ranges where the crack of gunfire was a constant percussion. Some of them watched her pass with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Most looked away, which somehow felt worse. She was used to that by now. 6 months of BUD/S had taught her that being the first woman in a previously all-male unit meant carrying weight that shouldn't exist, but did. Every mistake magnified, every success attributed to lowered standards. The only way through was perfect execution, and even that wouldn't satisfy everyone. Commander Jack Brennan's office occupied the corner of the Team 7 building with windows overlooking the Pacific. Elle knocked twice, crisp and professional, and waited. "Enter." The man behind the desk was 62 years old and looked like he'd been carved from granite by someone who understood violence intimately. 6'2", shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, silver hair cropped military short. A scar ran from his left cheekbone down to his jaw, the kind of mark that came from something sharp and personal, not shrapnel. His eyes were the coldest blue Elle had ever seen, the kind of eyes that had watched men die and made the calculations necessary to keep more from following. "Corporal Garrison reporting as ordered, sir." Brennan studied her for a long moment that felt like being dissected. His gaze was clinical, assessing, the look of a man who'd spent decades evaluating warriors and knew exactly what separated those who would stand from those who would break. "At ease." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down." Elle sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Through the window behind Brennan, she could see the Pacific rolling in with the patient rhythm of something that had witnessed empires rise and fall. "I'm going to be direct with you, Corporal," Brennan said, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone who'd earned the right to speak plainly. "You're the first female operator assigned to SEAL Team 7. That makes you a symbol, whether you like it or not. Some people are going to see you as proof that standards are declining. Others will expect you to be perfect. Both groups will be watching for you to fail." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Brennan leaned forward, elbows on desk, those cold eyes boring into her. "Because understanding intellectually and experiencing the reality are two different things. Every mistake you make will be magnified. Every success will be attributed to lowered standards or special treatment. You'll be carrying weight that shouldn't exist but does. Can you handle that?" El met his gaze without flinching. "My father taught me that you can't control what people think. You can only control what you do. I intend to do my job better than anyone expects, sir." Something flickered in Brennan's expression, there and gone so fast El almost missed it. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "Your father was Master Chief Thomas Garrison," Brennan said. It wasn't a question. "Medal of Honor recipient, killed in action, Helmand Province, November 2013. "Yes, sir." "That's a heavy legacy to carry." "It's the only one I have, sir. I plan to honor it." Brennan nodded slowly, and Elle caught something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "Team briefing is at 0800 tomorrow. You'll meet the operators you'll be working with. Some of them will give you a chance, some won't. Earn your place through performance, not politics. Dismissed." Elle stood, rendered a crisp salute, and turned toward the door. "Corporal?" She paused, looked back. Brennan's expression was unreadable as carved stone. "Welcome to Team 7. I hope you're as tough as you think you are. You're going to need to be." The team room was exactly what Elle expected. 20 operators, all male, all watching her with expressions ranging from skeptical to hostile. The air smelled like coffee and testosterone, and the particular wariness of men who'd been told their world was changing, whether they liked it or not. Lieutenant Kyle Van Horn stood at the front of the room, 6 feet of lean muscle and barely concealed contempt. He was 36, brown hair cut high and tight, sharp features that might have been handsome before something behind his eyes had gone sour. Word in the teams was that he'd been passed over for promotion twice. Word also was that he blamed diversity initiatives for holding him back, though anyone who'd worked with him knew the truth was more complicated. "Gentlemen," Van Horn announced, making the words sound like mockery, "allow me to introduce Corporal Eleanor Garrison. She'll be joining us as part of the Navy's ongoing diversity initiatives." He made the phrase sound like a disease. "I'm sure we'll all make her feel welcome." A few laughs, harsh and knowing. Most just stared with the flat affect of men evaluating a problem they hadn't asked for. Elle stood at the front of the room, hands clasped behind her back, face expressionless. She'd learned early that showing reaction only fed the fire. Give them nothing, her father had taught her. Let your work speak. "Garrison comes to us from the sniper program," Van Horn continued. "Apparently she's quite the shooter. We'll see about that." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "For now, she'll be rotating through standard team training. CQB, water ops, demolitions, land navigation, all the basic skills that separate SEALs from regular Navy. I expect everyone to hold her to the same standards you'd hold any operator." The way he said it made clear exactly what he meant. She would fail those standards, and everyone knew it, and her failure would prove what needed proving. "Chief Callahan," Van Horn said, nodding toward a compact man with dark hair and darker eyes. "You'll partner with Garrison for CQB drills this afternoon. Show her how we do things in the teams." Derek Callahan was 33, 5'10", built like a middleweight boxer with a kind of physical efficiency that came from 2 decades of hard training. He looked at Elle with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not hostile, exactly, but not welcoming either. Calculating, maybe. waiting to see what she was made of before committing to an opinion. "Yes, sir," Callahan said. The briefing continued. Upcoming training schedules, equipment maintenance, administrative matters that were the unglamorous reality of military service. Elle listened and took notes and ignored the weight of 24 stares boring into her back like physical pressure. When they dismissed, she was the first one out the door. Small victories. The kill house was a concrete structure designed to simulate urban combat. Narrow hallways that forced quick decisions, multiple rooms where threats could hide, pop-up targets that appeared with mechanical suddenness. Elle had run buildings like this 100 times in training, but never with live teammates who actively wanted her to fail. Chief Callahan handed her an HK-416 with the casual efficiency of a man who'd handled weapons so long they'd become extensions of his body. Standard loadout, 30 rounds, one in the chamber. We'll run a two-man clear. I take point, you cover angles and clear rooms I've passed. Keep your muzzle discipline tight. If you flag me, we're done. Questions? No, Chief. Try to keep up. They stacked on the door, and Elle felt her nervous system shift into combat mode. Heart rate elevated but controlled, senses sharpening, the world narrowing to threat assessment and target acquisition. This was what her father had taught her to access. This state where fear became fuel instead of paralysis. The door breached with a crack of splitting wood. Callahan flowed through like water, finding the path of least resistance. Weapon up, moving with the kind of fluid precision that came from doing something 1,000 times until thinking became obsolete. Elle followed, clearing left as he cleared right, her world narrowing to sight picture and trigger press, and the next fatal funnel. Pop-up target, hostile, armed, weapon raised. Elle's rifle spoke once, a controlled pair. Center mass, target down. They moved through 3 rooms in smooth coordination, weapons tracking in synchronized arcs, each covering the other's blind spots. For a moment, Elle felt it, that crystalline clarity of professional work done professionally, 2 operators functioning as a single organism with a single purpose. Then they hit the 4th room. Elle was halfway through the doorway, weapon up in sweeping right, when Callahan pivoted hard. His shoulder slammed into her with enough force to send her stumbling backward into the concrete wall. Her helmet cracked against the surface. Stars burst across her vision, bright and disorienting. "Watch your spacing," Callahan snapped, his voice harsh. "You were right on top of me. That's how you get teammates killed." Elle blinked away the disorientation, tasting copper where she'd bitten her tongue. "I was proper distance, Chief." "Are you arguing with me, Corporal? Because I don't have time to debate spacing doctrine with someone who clearly doesn't understand basic stack discipline." Through the ringing in her ears, Elle understood exactly what had just happened. The impact hadn't been accidental. Neither was the positioning that made it look like her mistake. This was intentional. A message delivered with enough plausible deniability that she couldn't call it out without looking like she was making excuses. "No, Chief, my mistake." "Damn right it is. Let's run it again. This time try not to compromise the team." They ran the drill 7 more times. By the end, Elle had bruises forming on her shoulders and ribs from where Callahan's corrections had landed. Each impact was perfectly positioned, hard enough to hurt, subtle enough to explain away as the intensity of realistic training. When a hand gripped her arm to pull her out of the way of a theoretical threat, the fingers dug in just a fraction too hard, just a second too long. When she took a knee to provide cover, a boot caught her ribs as Callahan moved past, and it might have been an accident except for the way he glanced back to see if she'd react. She didn't. She took every impact with her jaw clenched and her face blank, because showing pain was the same as showing weakness, and weakness was blood in the water. When they finally cleared the house clean, Callahan's expression was carefully neutral. "Better, still sloppy, but we'll work on it. You've got a long way to go before you're ready for real operations." Yes, Chief. Elle racked her weapon with movements that were automatic after years of training, walked out of the kill house with her head high and her spine straight. Behind her, she heard Callahan on the radio, his voice carrying just far enough to be sure she'd hear. Van Horn, we might have a problem with the new girl's spacing. She's dangerous to work with. Elle made it to the bathroom before the shaking started. She locked herself in a stall, sat on the toilet with her head between her knees, and concentrated on breathing until her hands stopped trembling and her vision cleared. This was day one. She had a long way to go. The next 3 days followed the same pattern with the mechanical inevitability of a machine designed to break people. PT runs where the pace was set just beyond sustainable, forcing her to either fall behind or push past safe limits. Weight room sessions where equipment was accidentally dropped near her feet, close enough that she had to jump back, close enough that the message was clear. Water training where someone always seemed to hold her under just a fraction too long during drown-proofing exercises, long enough that her vision started to tunnel and her lungs burned for air. Elle adapted because adaptation was survival. She ran faster, pushed harder, held her breath longer. Every morning she woke at 04:30, ran 5 miles on the beach while the stars were still visible, and practiced her father's breathing exercises until her heart rate dropped below 60. Control what you can control, he'd taught her. Everything else is just noise. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Van Horn ordered her to the range with the kind of smile that said he was looking forward to what came next. I hear you're supposed to be a shooter, he said, handing her an M40A6 rifle, still warm from the previous user. Let's see if the reputation is deserved. 800 yards, 10 rounds, no time limit. If you can't group under 6 inches, you're off the sniper rotation permanently. Those are the standards. Think you can meet them? 6 inches at 800 yards was a professional standard, the kind of accuracy that separated qualified shooters from true marksmen. Not impossible, but demanding, especially with a rifle she'd never fired before, ammunition she hadn't hand-loaded herself, and a zero that had been set for someone else's eye relief and shooting position. Elle took the weapon, checked the chamber with automatic efficiency, examined the Night Force scope's settings. The rifle felt foreign in her hands, someone else's tool configured for someone else's body geometry. She'd have to adapt on the fly, make adjustments without the luxury of practice rounds. Behind her, half the team had found reasons to be at the range, watching, waiting to see her fail. She settled into position behind the rifle, feeling the familiar geometry of body and weapon alignment. The wind was gusting from the west at 12 miles per hour, visible in the way the vegetation moved at the target line. Temperature 78 degrees, warm enough that heat shimmer would distort her sight picture. Humidity 43%. The mirage in the scope danced at 1 o'clock, a wavering distortion that made precise aiming difficult. Elle's breathing slowed, deepening into the rhythm her father had taught her. The fundamentals were always the same, he'd said. Natural point of aim, sight picture, trigger control, follow through. Everything else was just variables to calculate and compensate for. First shot. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a sharp crack. Through the scope, she saw the impact. 2 inches high, 1 inch right. Not bad for a cold-bore shot with an unfamiliar weapon, but not good enough. She adjusted her hold, compensated for the wind drift, made a fractional change to her cheek weld. Second shot, closer, 1 inch high, half inch right. 9 more shots in careful succession, each one a conversation between her, the rifle, and the immutable laws of physics. Calculate wind drift based on vegetation movement and mirage direction. Adjust for the rifle's specific zero. Control breathing to minimize movement during trigger press. Follow through, maintaining sight picture even after the shot breaks. When the smoke cleared and the last echo faded, Van Horn walked down to examine the target through binoculars, his stride confident like a man expecting confirmation of what he already knew. Elle remained in position, watching him through the scope, her expression carefully blank. Whatever the result was, She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her react. He returned with a face like thunderclouds, the kind of expression that meant he'd gotten an answer he didn't want. 4.2 inches, he said flatly, the words forced out like they tasted bad. Acceptable. Barely. Then he walked away without another word, and Elle heard the message clearly. You passed this test, but there will be others. We'll find your breaking point eventually. That night, Elle lay in her rack in the barracks and took careful inventory of her body. Bruises on both shoulders, deep tissue damage from repeated impacts during CQB drills. 3 cracked ribs on the left side that made breathing sharp and painful. Contusions on her upper arms where fingers had gripped hard enough to leave distinct impressions shaped like fingertips. Her right knee was swollen from where a boot had accidentally caught it during room clearing. She'd been in Team 7 for 4 days. At this rate, she'd be medevaced for injuries within 2 weeks, and the official reports would say she couldn't handle the physical demands. Training casualty. Not cut out for SEAL work. Exactly what they wanted. Elle pulled out her phone and stared at the photograph of her father that she kept as her lock screen. Young, strong, alive, holding her as a baby with hands that could kill or cradle with equal precision. In the photo, he was smiling at the camera with absolute confidence, the kind that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you were capable of. I'm not quitting, Dad, she whispered to the screen, to the memory, to the promise she'd made standing at his grave. I don't care what they do. I'm not quitting. In the darkness of the barracks, Elle didn't hear the door open with the practiced silence of someone trained to move unseen. Didn't see the figure that stood in shadow for a long moment, watching her with eyes that missed nothing. Commander Jack Brennan had been a Navy SEAL for 40 years. He'd learned to move silently in places where noise meant death. Mogadishu streets where militia waited in every shadow. Iraqi cities where insurgents planted IEDs with professional skill. Afghan mountains where the Taliban knew every rock and valley. He'd also learned to recognize the aftermath of intentional harm disguised as training, because he'd seen it before and stamped it out every time. The bruises he'd glimpsed on Elle's arms during the range session told him a story. The way she'd moved through the CQB course, slightly favoring her left side, compensating for rib damage, told him more. The finger-shaped marks he'd noticed when she'd removed her jacket in the California heat told him everything. He stood there for a long moment, watching the daughter of his best friend stare at a photograph and fight back tears she wouldn't let fall. Watching her hold on to pride and determination like they were life preservers in a sea designed to drown her. Then he turned and walked silently back into the night, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth, already making plans. The medical bay was empty when Elle arrived the next morning for mandatory check-in. Dr. Marcus Sutherland was 41, a former Army Ranger who'd done 4 tours in Iraq before cross-decking to Navy as a combat medic. He had kind eyes that had seen too much suffering and hands that had put bodies back together in places where proper hospitals were just a pleasant fiction. "Morning, Corporal," he said with professional warmth. "Just routine evaluation. Let's check your vitals." Elle sat on the exam table while he took her blood pressure, slightly elevated but within normal range, listened to her lungs, went through the standard checklist with practiced efficiency. Professional, thorough, impersonal. "Any injuries I should know about?" His voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "No, Doc." "You sure? Training's been pretty intense from what I hear. First week in a SEAL team can be rough on anyone." "Nothing unusual, Doc." Sutherland nodded, made a note on his clipboard. "All right, you can keep your shirt on if you're more comfortable, but I need to check for any contusions or impact damage. Standard protocol after first week of training. Too many operators try to push through injuries that need treatment." Elle hesitated. Keeping her shirt on meant he wouldn't see the full extent of the damage. Taking it off meant documenting evidence that could be used against Van Horn, but could also make her look weak, unable to handle the physical demands. "I'm a professional, Corporal," Sutherland said quietly. I've seen every kind of injury there is. Whatever I find stays between us unless it's life-threatening, but I need to see what we're dealing with." Elle pulled off her shirt. Sutherland's expression didn't change. He had too much experience for that. But Elle saw something flicker in his eyes. Concern. Recognition. His hands were gentle as he examined her shoulders, her ribs, the dark purple bloom across her left side that looked like someone had used her as a punching bag. "These are from training?" he asked carefully, his fingers probing the ribs with professional delicacy. "Yes, Doc. CQB drills can be rough," he said in a tone that suggested he knew exactly how rough they should and shouldn't be. "But these patterns," he pointed to her upper arm, where 5 distinct bruises formed a pattern unmistakably shaped like fingers gripping hard. "This looks like grab marks, sustained pressure, not impact." Elle met his gaze steadily. "I'm new to the team. Sometimes the training gets physical while they're correcting mistakes. I'm learning." Sutherland held her eyes for a long moment, and Elle saw the calculation happening behind his professional mask. He knew what he was looking at. The question was what he'd do about it. "I'm going to document these injuries as training-related impacts," he said finally, his voice careful and deliberate. "But Corporal, if the correction ever crosses a line into something you can't handle, you need to report it. There are proper channels." "I can handle it, Doc." "I'm sure you can." He made several notes, his pen moving quickly across the page with the decisiveness of someone who'd made a choice. "But you shouldn't have to handle abuse disguised as training. That's not what the teams are supposed to be about." That afternoon, Elle found herself summoned to Commander Brennan's office for the second time. The walk across the compound felt longer than it should have, and she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. He was standing at the window when she entered, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the Pacific with the stillness of someone deep in thought. He didn't turn around immediately. "Corporal Garrison, how are you finding Team 7? "It's exactly what I expected, sir." "Is it?" Now he turned and those cold blue eyes pinned her in place with uncomfortable precision. "Because Doc Sutherland sent me an interesting medical report. Seems you've accumulated quite a collection of bruises in 4 days. Impressive, really, for someone who's supposed to be learning basic team integration." "Training is demanding, sir." "Training is demanding," Brennan agreed, moving to his desk with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime maintaining combat fitness. "Abuse is something else entirely." He picked up a folder, opened it, scanned the contents with an expression that gave nothing away. "I've been reviewing your performance metrics. Your shooting is exceptional, top 5% of all SEAL snipers. Your CQB times are above average despite being new to team tactics. Your PT scores put you in the top 15% of all operators across naval special warfare." He set the folder down with deliberate care. "So why are you getting hurt so frequently? Why is someone who scores in the top percentile across multiple metrics accumulating impact injuries at a rate that suggests either incredible clumsiness or something more deliberate?" Elle chose her words carefully, aware that this conversation could determine her entire future in the teams. "The team has high standards, sir. I'm working to meet them. Some of the operators are harder on me than others, but that's their right. I need to prove I belong here." "The team has standards I set," Brennan said, his voice hardening. "And nowhere in those standards does it say that operators should accumulate impact injuries from training partners who are supposedly teaching them. I've run SEAL teams for 20 years, Corporal. I know the difference between hard training and deliberate harm." He leaned forward, both hands flat on the desk. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I expect a direct answer. Is someone on this team deliberately hurting you?" The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, vibrating with tension. Elle knew what he wanted her to say, knew that the right answer, the truthful answer, would trigger an investigation that might clear out the rot in Team 7. But it would also mark her as someone who couldn't fight her own battles, someone who ran to authority when things got difficult. "Sir," Elle said finally, her voice steady. With respect, if I can't earn the team's respect by handling whatever they throw at me, I don't deserve to be here. My father didn't raise someone who runs to authority when things get difficult. He taught me to fight my own battles, improve my worth through performance, not politics. Brennan's expression shifted, becoming something Elle couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or recognition of something familiar. Your father was one of the finest warriors I ever knew, he said quietly. Elle's head snapped up. You knew him, sir? I knew him. Brennan's voice was soft now, almost gentle, weighted with memory. Thomas Garrison was my friend, my brother in everything but blood. We served together for 15 years. Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. Operations that are still classified and ones that made the history books. He saved my life more times than I can count. Elle felt the world tilt slightly, her carefully maintained emotional control threatening to crack. Why didn't you tell me when I arrived, sir? Because I wanted to see if you could handle this team without special treatment, without anyone knowing you're the daughter of a legend, without the burden of expectations or the shield of favoritism. Brennan's eyes were hard again, all business. And because I needed to know if you'd report abuse or try to muscle through it on your own. Your father had the same stubborn pride, got him killed in the end. Sir, you made your choice, Corporal. You chose to fight your own battles without asking for help. I respect that. He moved to the window again, his silhouette dark against the bright California sky. But understand something. Your father died covering the extract of his team because someone higher up the chain made a tactical error that put us in an impossible position. He paid for someone else's mistake with his life. I was there. I held him while he bled out on Afghan soil, and his last words were about you. Elle's throat tightened, and she fought to keep her breathing steady. He made me promise two things, Brennan continued, his voice rough with old grief. First, if you ever followed him into this life, I'd make sure you got no special treatment. You'd earn your place or fail on your own merits. No shortcuts because of who your father was. Second, I'd make damn sure nobody broke you through malice instead of proper training. That I'd protect you from the kind of abuse that destroys good operators before they get a chance to prove themselves. He turned back to face her, and Elle saw something in his expression that looked like determination sharpened to a weapon's edge. I've kept the first promise. I've watched you struggle, watched you suffer, watched you accumulate injuries that make me want to put someone through a wall. But I've done nothing to ease your path. No favoritism, no special treatment. You've earned every bit of respect you've gotten on your own merits. Brennan's smile was cold and sharp as broken glass. Now I'm going to keep the second promise, but not the way you think. Sir, in 1 week, this team deploys for advanced desert training, 7 days in the Chocolate Mountains, survival skills, long-range navigation, live fire exercises against an Op-4 team that won't pull punches. No support, minimal water, temperatures that'll hit 120 during the day and drop to 40 at night. His eyes glittered with something that might have been anticipation. It's going to be the hardest week of your life. And by the end of it, everyone on this team, everyone in Naval Special Warfare, will know exactly what you're made of. No more questions, no more doubts, just proof. Elle's spine straightened automatically. I'm ready, sir. We'll see, he gestured toward the door. Dismissed. Pack light and hydrate heavy. The desert doesn't care about diversity quotas or family legacy. Out there, only one thing matters. Can you perform when everything's trying to kill you? Elle turned to leave, then paused. Sir, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Corporal. What's coming will make the last 4 days look like a vacation. But if you survive it, if you prove yourself out there, nobody will ever question whether you belong in the teams again. That's all I'm asking for, sir. A fair chance to prove myself. Brennan's expression softened slightly. Your father said almost the same thing before his first combat deployment. I told him then what I'll tell you now. Be careful what you wish for. The universe has a way of giving us exactly the tests we think we're ready for, right when we're least prepared. That evening, Elle sat in her rack and did something she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. She pulled out the small audio recorder she'd purchased her first day on base, a civilian device, off the books, paid for with cash, and checked the battery. 48 hours of recording time on a single charge. She thought about honor and fairness and fighting battles straight on with no deception. She thought about her father's code of ethics and the warrior culture he'd lived and died for. All the values that said this kind of surveillance was beneath a SEAL operator. Then she thought about Lieutenant Van Horn's smile when he'd slammed her into the kill house wall hard enough to crack her helmet, about the finger-shaped bruises on her arms that Doc Sutherland had documented, about the way the team watched her like wolves circling wounded prey, waiting for her to show weakness so they could justify tearing her apart. Her father had also taught her that honor without intelligence was just another word for dead, that warriors who fought stupid lost to warriors who fought smart, that the mission mattered more than personal pride. Elle slipped the recorder into the inner pocket of Van Horn's gym bag during the next morning's PT session, her movements casual and practiced. Nobody saw, nobody suspected. Why would they? She was just the diversity hire, struggling to keep up, not a threat to anyone. If they wanted to play games, she'd play, but she'd play to win. The night before the desert deployment, Elle ran her standard 5 miles on the beach, then added another 3 because the nervous energy wouldn't let her stop. The Pacific was dark and vast, waves rolling in with the patient rhythm of something that had seen civilizations rise and fall and didn't care about either. Somewhere out there, across thousands of miles of water, men were training to kill Americans. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, a compound sat in a valley where her father had died, buying time for his team to escape. Somewhere in the future that was rushing toward her like a freight train, Elle would face a test that would define the rest of her life. She ran until her legs burned and her lungs screamed, until the pain in her ribs was bright and sharp enough to cut through the noise in her head. Then she ran another mile just to prove she could, because pain was temporary, but quitting was permanent. When she finally stopped, bent over with hands on knees, gasping in the salt air, she looked up at the sky. Stars scattered across darkness like tracer rounds frozen in flight, the same stars her father had navigated by in deserts half a world away. "I'm ready, Dad," she whispered to the night, to the memory, to the legacy that weighed on her shoulders. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready." The Pacific rolled on, indifferent and eternal, keeping its secrets. In his office, Commander Jack Brennan sat alone in the darkness, staring at a photograph from 1991. 2 young men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the invincible confidence of warriors who just survived something that should have killed them. Blood still visible on their uniforms, dust caked in their hair, but alive and unbreakable. Thomas Garrison and Jack Brennan, brothers in everything but blood. On his desk sat 7 folders, personnel files for members of Team 7, each one containing evidence he'd been gathering for the past 4 days. Phone records showing coordination between Van Horn and other officers known for opposing women in combat roles. Training observation reports from instructors who'd noticed irregularities but hadn't reported them. Medical documentation from Doc Sutherland that painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. Testimony from operators who'd seen things but stayed silent out of misplaced loyalty or fear. Van Horn had made a mistake. He'd hurt the daughter of a man who'd saved Brennan's life more times than either of them could count. And Brennan was about to teach him that some debts could only be paid in very specific currencies. But first, Elle needed to prove herself. Not to him. He already knew what she was made of, saw Thomas's steel in every choice she made. To the team, to herself, to everyone who would watch what happened next and decide whether women belonged in combat operations. The desert would provide that proof. Brennan closed the folders with deliberate care and stood, stretching muscles that carried the aches of 4 decades in the teams. He was 62 years old. He'd planned to retire quietly, fade into consulting work, maybe teach at the War College and share lessons learned in 24 wars. Then he'd gotten the call that Thomas Garrison's daughter had made it through BUD/S and been assigned to Team 7. And retirement had suddenly seemed a lot less appealing than one final mission. He owed Thomas that much. He owed Thomas everything. Outside, the California night was cool and perfect, the kind of night that made you forget the world was full of people trying to kill each other. Somewhere in the barracks, Elle was probably still awake, running through her pre-mission rituals the way her father had taught her. Somewhere in the officers' quarters, Van Horn was probably congratulating himself on breaking another female operator before she could embarrass the teams with her inevitable failure. In 7 days, one of them was going to learn a very important lesson about underestimating the children of warriors. Brennan smiled in the darkness, and it wasn't a kind expression. He couldn't wait to see which one. Part 2. The Revelation. The Chocolate Mountain Aerial Gunnery Range stretched across Southern California like a testament to desolation. 100,000 acres of sand, rock, and heat that could kill the unprepared in a dozen different ways. The Marines used it for aerial bombing practice. The Navy used it to forge SEALs in conditions that made regular training look merciful by comparison. Elle stood on the tarmac at 0600, full combat load on her back, watching the rest of Team 7 board the transport helicopter. 75 pounds of gear, water, ammunition, and survival equipment. The M4A1 carbine in her hands felt like an old friend. The desert stretching ahead felt like a promise of pain that she'd have to keep. Commander Brennan stood apart from the team, clipboard in hand, his expression carved from the same stone as the mountains in the distance. He'd briefed them the night before. 7 days, minimal support, live fire scenarios with an OP4 team that wouldn't pull punches. Navigate 30 miles through terrain that broke experienced operators. Survive temperatures that could kill in hours. Complete objectives while operating on minimal water and maximum stress. Standard SEAL training turned up to 11. Lieutenant Van Horn walked past Elle without looking at her directly, but she caught the smile at the corner of his mouth. He was looking forward to this. 7 days in the desert, away from oversight and documentation, where training could get rough and accidents could happen, and nobody would question the official reports. Chief Derek Callahan paused beside her, his expression unreadable as weathered stone. "Stay close to me out there, Garrison. Desert doesn't care about diversity quotas or family legacy. Out there, you're just meat that the sun wants to cook." "I'll try to keep up, Chief." Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone before Elle could identify it. Then he boarded the helicopter without another word. Elle was the last one on. She strapped in between 2 operators who shifted away like she carried contagion, creating a buffer of empty space that spoke louder than words. The helicopter's rotors wound up to a scream that made conversation impossible. And then they were lifting, leaving the civilized world behind. Below, Commander Brennan watched them go, his phone already in his hand. He typed a quick text to Doc Sutherland. "Medical kit prepped. Guardian Angel protocol confirmed. Stay invisible unless life-threatening." The response came immediately. "Understood. I've got Overwatch." Brennan pocketed the phone and walked to his vehicle. He had 3 more calls to make. People to position, safeguards to establish. Elle didn't know it yet, but she wasn't going into that desert alone. She just needed to believe she was. That belief would make all the difference. The insertion point was a flat stretch of hardpan 12 miles from the first objective marker, surrounded by mountains that looked like they'd been dropped there by an angry god. The team offloaded in efficient silence, checking gear with the automatic movements of people who'd done this so many times it had become ritual. The heat hit like a physical force, 118 degrees of dry air that sucked moisture from skin and lungs with patient malevolence. Elle felt sweat evaporate almost instantly leaving salt deposits that would chafe later. 4 liters of water in her canteens, maybe enough for 6 hours if she rationed carefully, less if the temperature climbed higher. Van Horn gathered them in a loose circle, his voice carrying across the desert silence. We've got 7 days to complete 3 objectives. Navigation to Checkpoint Alpha, 12 miles northeast. Live fire exercise at Checkpoint Bravo. Final objective is extraction at Checkpoint Charlie, another 18 miles through the mountains. He paused, his gaze lingering on Elle with obvious anticipation. Op 4 is out there somewhere. They've been briefed to make this realistic. Expect contact at any time. Rules of engagement are standard, simunition rounds only, but they'll hurt like hell. Anyone who gets compromised or injured gets medevaced. Anyone who can't complete the mission fails. Clear? A chorus of acknowledgments. Van Horn consulted his list, assigning pairs. Elle waited, knowing what was coming. Callahan, you're with Garrison. Try to make sure she doesn't get lost or need rescue. I'd hate for this to end before it really begins. A few laughs, harsh in the desert air. Elle's face remained blank as stone. They moved out in pairs, spreading across the desert in a loose tactical formation that would make them harder to track from a distance. Elle and Callahan took the left flank, navigating by compass and terrain association. The GPS units were sealed in their packs, emergency only. This was old-school land navigation, the kind that had kept warriors alive before satellites. The first 3 hours passed in brutal silence. Walking through deep sand with 75 pounds of gear was like climbing stairs that never ended, each step requiring concentrated effort. Sweat soaked through Elle's uniform, evaporating almost instantly in the dry heat. Her canteens felt lighter already. Callahan set a punishing pace, just fast enough to make conversation impossible, slow enough that falling behind would be obvious and shameful. Every 20 minutes he'd glance back to check her position, his expression unchanging, giving nothing away. At hour 4, they stopped for a 10-minute break in the shade of a rock outcropping that provided maybe 5 degrees of relief. Elle dropped her pack with controlled care. Everything hurt now, the kind of deep muscle ache that came from sustained effort in extreme conditions. She pulled out a canteen, took 2 careful swallows. The water was body temperature and tasted like plastic, but it was life. Callahan drank from his own canteen, watching her over the rim. You're doing better than I expected. Should I thank you for the low expectations, Chief? Almost a smile. Almost. Your old man ever tell you about Fallujah? Elle's hand paused on the canteen. He didn't talk much about deployments, said some things were better left in the sandbox. Second Battle of Fallujah, November 2004. House-to-house fighting, insurgents in every building, IEDs on every corner. Callahan stared out at the desert, but Elle could tell he was seeing something else entirely. I was 23, fresh out of ranger school. Thought I was invincible because I could run fast and shoot straight. Our convoy hit an IED. Humvee flipped, caught fire. I was trapped inside, unconscious, burning alive. He took another drink, his hands steady despite the weight of memory. Your father pulled me out. Vehicle was fully engulfed, ammunition cooking off, another explosion imminent. He took shrapnel from a secondary blast while he was dragging me clear, saved my life without hesitation, then went back to fighting like nothing had happened. Never mentioned it afterward, never asked for gratitude, just did his job. Elle said nothing, waiting, sensing there was more. I owe him everything. I owe you nothing, but I owe his memory something, and I've been paying that debt poorly. Callahan's jaw tightened, muscles jumping. I'm not apologizing for what's happened. What Van Horn's doing is wrong, and I went along with it because I was afraid of standing out, afraid of being the one who broke ranks. That makes me complicit. That makes me guilty. Chief, I can't fix it, not yet, but I won't make it worse. From here on, you get honest training from me. Nothing more, nothing less. Fair evaluation, no sabotage. And when we get back to base, I'll testify about what I've seen. That's all I can offer. Before Elle could respond, her primary water bladder exploded in a spray that soaked her pack and drained into the sand. The plastic split along a seam she hadn't noticed. A clean knife cut, sealed with quick-setting adhesive that dissolved under heat and pressure. 4 liters became 0 in seconds, draining into thirsty ground. Callahan stared at the ruined bladder, then at Elle, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes like a sunrise made of anger. Van Horn, he said quietly, the name like a curse. Elle picked up the destroyed bladder, examining the cut with professional detachment. Sabotage, sophisticated and timed perfectly to fail when she'd need water most. How long until the next water cache? 8 hours, maybe 10 in this heat. Callahan pulled out his own canteen without hesitation. Take half of mine. That'll leave you short, Chief. I said take it, Garrison. This is the desert. We share water or we die together. Those are the only options that matter out here. Elle accepted the canteen, drank 1/3 instead of half, handed it back. Thank you, Chief. Don't thank me. Just stay alive long enough for me to fix this properly. Your father deserves better than watching his daughter get destroyed by small men with smaller minds. They moved out, and Elle filed away another piece of information. Callahan had turned. Not completely, maybe not permanently, but for now he was more ally than threat. Small victories. Behind them, hidden among the rocks 300 yards distant, a figure in desert camouflage lowered binoculars and spoke into a radio with practiced quiet. Overwatch to command. Sabotage confirmed. Subject adapting. Callahan appears to be switching loyalties. Commander Brennan's voice crackled back through the encrypted channel. Understood. Continue observation. Do not intervene unless life-threatening. She needs to handle this herself. Doc Sutherland shifted position slightly, his M40A6 sniper rifle tracking Elle and Callahan as they moved across the desert like ants crossing an ocean. He'd been trailing them since insertion, invisible and patient, a guardian angel with a scope and orders to watch, but not protect unless absolutely necessary. Brennan had given him clear instructions. Document everything. Intervene only if Elle's life was in immediate danger. Let her fight her own battles and prove herself through performance. Hard orders, but necessary ones. The temperature climbed toward 125 degrees. Night in the desert was a different kind of hell. Temperature plunging from deadly heat to bitter cold. Darkness so absolute that the stars seemed close enough to touch. Predators emerging to hunt. Elle and Callahan reached the first checkpoint at 2200 hours. Found the rest of the team already dug in around the GPS waypoint. Van Horn looked up as they approached, his expression carefully concerned. Cutting it close, Chief. I was about to mark Garrison as heat casualty and send the medevac. She's fine, sir. We had equipment failure that slowed us down. Equipment failure. Van Horn's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word, that he knew exactly what had happened because he'd arranged it. How unfortunate. Garrison, show me your canteens. Elle pulled out the destroyed bladder and 1 empty bottle, presenting them for inspection without comment. Van Horn examined them with exaggerated concern, turning them over in his hands like evidence. You went through 4 liters in 8 hours? That's poor resource management, Corporal. Basic desert survival skills. I'm concerned about your ability to complete this training. The primary bladder failed, sir. Structural compromise along the seam. These things happen in training. Equipment fails. People make mistakes. Van Horn tossed the bladder back to her with casual dismissal. Try to be more careful. We're 12 miles from resupply. You'll have to ration what the team shares until then. Think you can manage that? Callahan opened his mouth to protest, but Elle caught his eye and shook her head fractionally. Van Horn was looking for a reaction, any sign of weakness or complaint. She wouldn't give him one. Understood, sir. I'll manage. Good. We move out at 0600. Get some rest. That night, Elle lay in her sleeping bag and took inventory. Lips already cracking from dehydration, the skin splitting in painful ways, muscles tight from heat stress and sustained exertion. Maybe 1 liter of water remained, shared between her and Callahan after he'd insisted on giving her most of his supply. 12 miles to the next cache, then the live fire exercise, then another 18 miles to extraction. 5.5 days left. She could do 5.5 days on spit and stubbornness if she had to. Her father had done worse. Above her, the Milky Way sprawled across the sky like someone had shattered diamonds against black velvet. Her father had loved the desert stars, had taken her camping in Arizona when she was 12, taught her to navigate by Polaris and Orion, told her that warriors had been finding their way by starlight since humans first learned to make war. "The desert shows you what you're made of," he'd said, his voice quiet in her memory. "Everything stripped away except the essentials. Water, shelter, will to survive. Most people fold under that kind of pressure. Warriors adapt and overcome." Elle closed her eyes and slept the light sleep of someone who knew threat could come from any direction, her mind half awake and processing sounds even as her body rested. At 0300, the Op-4 hit them. Elle was on watch, sitting 30 meters from the main camp, in a position that gave her clear sightlines, when she heard it. The whisper of fabric against sand, too deliberate to be wind, too rhythmic to be animal. Her hand found the M4 beside her, slipping off the safety in absolute silence. 4 shapes moved through the darkness, night vision goggles glowing faintly green in her own NVGs. They were heading straight for the team's position, clearly briefed on the exact location, moving with the confidence of professionals who knew where their targets slept. Standard Op-4 doctrine was simunition rounds, paint markers that hurt but didn't maim. But the way these operators were moving spoke of something more aggressive than standard training harassment. They weren't practicing, they were hunting. Elle raised her rifle, sighted through the PVS-31 night vision mounted on her helmet. The shapes resolved into operators in full kit, weapons at the ready, moving in tactical formation. She could take out the first one easily, alert the camp, turn this into a proper firefight where superior numbers would win. Instead, she did something her father had taught her. She thought 3 moves ahead. If she engaged now, the Op-4 would scatter, regroup, hit them somewhere else with better preparation. If she alerted the camp, Van Horn would claim she panicked at shadows, reinforcing the narrative that she wasn't cut out for operations. But if she let them approach, identified their exact plan, she could turn their attack into an opportunity to demonstrate tactical thinking that would impress even hostile teammates. Elle keyed her radio, switching to the frequency only she and Callahan were monitoring. "Callahan, 4 tangos approaching from the northwest, 030 degrees. Don't alert the camp. Trust me on this." A pause that felt like an eternity. Then, "Copy, standing by." The Op-4 team closed within 50 meters, moving with the confidence of professionals who thought they had complete surprise. Elle waited, counting heartbeats, watching their formation, analyzing their approach vector. Then she saw it. The team leader was carrying something that wasn't standard issue, a canteen with a reflective strip that caught starlight wrong, too new and too full to belong to someone who'd been in the field. They weren't just here for simulated combat, they were here to steal water from her position. Make it look like she'd lost her supply through carelessness, force a medical evacuation for dehydration. Elle smiled in the darkness, and it wasn't a kind expression. She let them get within 30 meters, let them spread out, preparing to rush the camp in coordinated assault. Let them commit fully to their approach vector with no easy retreat. Then she stood up from her hide position, weapon raised, and activated her IR strobe, a flashing infrared light invisible to the naked eye, but blazing like a supernova through night vision goggles. All 4 Op-4 operators grabbed at their NVGs, blinded by the sudden glare, their night-adapted vision destroyed in an instant. In that moment of confusion and disorientation, Elle moved. She sprinted parallel to their line, not toward them, but to their flank, firing simunition rounds as she moved. The paint rounds cracked through the air, hitting two operators center mass before they could recover their vision or bring weapons to bear. Behind her, Callahan erupted from the darkness like a vengeful spirit, his own weapons spitting paint in controlled bursts. Another Op-4 down, blue paint blooming across his chest. The last operator managed to bring his weapon up, combat instincts overriding temporary blindness. But L was already sliding into cover behind a rock, changing position before he could acquire her. She popped up 8 feet to the left, double-tapped him with paint rounds that marked him as eliminated. 4 Op-4 operators neutralized in under 15 seconds. The main camp was stirring now, weapons coming up, voices calling out targets that no longer existed. But the threat was already eliminated, the battle won before most of them knew it had started. Van Horn appeared, weapon ready, furious. "What the hell happened, Garrison?" "Op-4 approached from the northwest, sir," Elle reported, her voice steady despite adrenaline screaming through her veins. "I engaged and eliminated the threat with Chief Callahan's assistance. 4 enemy combatants neutralized, 0 friendly casualties." One of the OPFOR operators pulled off his night vision and stood, hands raised in surrender, professionalism overriding whatever instructions he'd been given. "She's not lying, sir. We never saw her until the IR strobe. By then it was over. Textbook ambush." Van Horn's jaw worked like he was chewing glass, working through responses and rejecting each one. "You were supposed to be on watch, Garrison, not playing hero." "I was on watch, sir. That's why I saw them coming and was able to respond appropriately." "You should have alerted the camp immediately, standard protocol." "With respect, sir, if I'd alerted the camp, they would have scattered and regrouped for another attempt. I assessed that immediate action would neutralize the threat more effectively with fewer resources expended. I was correct." It was the right answer. Textbook tactics. Exactly what any operator should have done in the same situation. Van Horn couldn't argue with it without looking incompetent or revealing that he wanted her to fail, regardless of performance. "Secure the prisoners," he said finally, the words forced through clenched teeth. "Everyone else, back to sleep. We move out at 0600. As the team settled down, Callahan approached Elle at her watch position, his expression complicated. "That was good work. Smart thinking with the IR strobe." "Thank you, Chief. Where'd you learn to use night vision as a weapon like that?" "My father. He said that if you can control what the enemy sees, you control the fight. Most people think night vision is just for seeing in the dark. Dad taught me it's also a vulnerability if you know how to exploit it." Callahan nodded slowly, and Elle saw respect beginning to replace skepticism. "Thomas was the smartest operator I ever knew. Tactical thinking that was always 3 steps ahead. Looks like it runs in the family." He paused, glancing back at the subdued Op-4 team. The leader was carrying an extra canteen, brand new, full of water. "I'm guessing that wasn't coincidence." "No, Chief. I don't think it was. Van Horn's not just trying to break you through hard training. He's trying to force a medical evacuation. Dehydration in the field, it'd be documented as your failure to manage resources, not sabotage. Clean hands, official record that says you couldn't handle the physical demands." Elle met his eyes in the darkness. "Then I won't get dehydrated. You've got maybe 8 ounces of water left and 12 miles to the next cache in heat that'll hit 1:30 tomorrow." "I know, Chief. I can count." Callahan pulled out his own canteen, still half full despite his own needs, and held it out with a kind of deliberate care that made it clear this was a decision he'd thought through. "Take it. All of it. Chief, I need you functional, Garrison, because when we get back to base, I'm going to testify about what I've seen. Every detail, every incident, every piece of sabotage I participated in or witnessed. Van Horn's going down, but that only works if you survive long enough to see it happen." His voice roughened with emotion he wasn't quite hiding. Your father saved my life in Fallujah, pulled me from a burning vehicle while taking fire, got me to safety when I couldn't walk. Let me return the favor for his daughter. Let me do one thing right in this whole mess. Elle took the canteen, and the weight of it felt like more than water. Thank you, Chief. Don't thank me yet. We've still got 5 days of this hell, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. The second day was worse in ways that made the first day look merciful. Temperature hit 127 degrees, hot enough that the metal on their rifles became painful to touch with bare skin. The landscape wavered in heat shimmer that made navigation by terrain features nearly impossible, turning the world into something liquid and uncertain. They moved through a realm made of punishing light and crushing heat, each step an exercise in sustained willpower. Elle rationed the water Callahan had given her, taking tiny sips every 30 minutes, letting the moisture spread across her cracked lips before swallowing. Her tongue felt like leather. Her head pounded with the beginning of heat stress. The world had narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the next heartbeat. But she kept moving, because stopping meant failing, and failing meant proving everyone right who said she didn't belong. Around her, other operators struggled. 2 went down with heat exhaustion severe enough to require medevac, their core temperatures climbing to dangerous levels, despite their experience and conditioning. Van Horn watched Elle with undisguised frustration, waiting for her to collapse, waiting for the desert to do what he couldn't do directly. She didn't collapse. She walked through that furnace with her head up and her pace steady, and with every mile she proved something that couldn't be argued away. On day 3, they reached the live fire exercise checkpoint. A range had been set up in a canyon, targets positioned from 200 to 1,000 yards, each one representing a test of skill under the worst possible conditions. Each operator would demonstrate rifle proficiency under observation, their performance documented for permanent record. Elle's turn came at 1400 hours, the hottest part of the day when the air was so superheated that breathing felt like inhaling from an oven. She was dehydrated, exhausted, running on fumes and stubbornness. 800 yards, Van Horn announced with poorly concealed satisfaction. 10 rounds. You need a 6-inch group or you're off the sniper rotation permanently. Same standards as base. Think you can manage? The same test he'd given her at Coronado, but this time she was operating on minimal water, maximum stress, using a rifle she'd never zeroed personally. The deck was stacked, and everyone knew it. Elle took position behind the M40A6, feeling heat radiating from the barrel in waves. Through the Night Force scope, the target wavered like something underwater, the mirage so severe that getting an accurate sight picture seemed nearly impossible. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, finding the calm center her father had taught her to access, the place where pain and stress and doubt couldn't reach. When she opened them again, the world had narrowed to just scope and target, physics and precision. First shot, high and right, exactly as she'd expected from a rifle zeroed for someone else's eye relief and shooting position. She adjusted based on that first impact, factoring in the mirage, the heat, the slight tremor in her hands from dehydration. Made fractional changes to her hold, her breathing, her trigger press. The rifle became an extension of her will. The bullet a messenger she was sending downrange with absolute clarity of purpose. 9 more shots in careful succession, each one a conversation with the immutable laws of ballistics. Calculate, adjust, breathe, press, follow through. When she finished, Van Horn walked down to check the target, his stride confident like a man expecting vindication. Elle remained in position, watching him through the scope, her expression blank as desert stone. Whatever the result was, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her react. He stared at the target for a long moment, his body language shifting from confidence to something darker. Then he pulled out a measuring tape, checked the group size with movements that were sharp and angry. 3.8 inches, he announced, his voice tight as wire about to snap. Acceptable. Better than acceptable. Better than most of the team had managed in ideal conditions, with familiar weapons. Under the circumstances, it was borderline extraordinary. As Elle stood from the rifle, the world tilted sideways. Her vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. She felt herself falling, the ground rushing up to meet her. Strong hands caught her before she hit. Callahan, his face showing genuine concern. "Easy, Garrison. I've got you." "I'm fine," she managed, but her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. "You're dehydrated and going into shock." "Doc!" Doc Sutherland appeared. He'd been part of the official team all along, Elle realized dimly, not knowing he was also her guardian angel watching from the shadows. He checked her vitals with practiced efficiency, his expression professional, but worried. Pulse 120, skin's hot and dry, textbook heat stress. She needs IV fluids, and she needs them now. "No," Elle said, forcing the words out through cotton wool filling her head. "Just water. I can walk it off." Van Horn appeared above her, and even through her compromised vision, Elle could see the satisfaction in his expression. "Medical evacuation, Corporal. You've reached your limit. You gave it a good try, but some things aren't meant to be." "Sir, That's an order, Garrison. You're done." Elle's vision was graying at the edges, her body screaming for water and rest, but she forced herself to focus. This was the moment. This was where she either proved herself or became another statistic proving that women couldn't handle SEAL training. "With respect, sir, request denied. I can complete the mission." "You're in no condition. Check the regulations, Lieutenant." Commander Brennan's voice cut through the argument like a blade through silk. He'd appeared from nowhere, stepping out of a vehicle that had just arrived, and the authority in his voice made even Van Horn pause. "Operator can refuse medevac unless medic determines life-threatening condition." "Doc?" Sutherland glanced at Brennan, then at Elle, and she saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He knew what Brennan was asking, knew what was at stake. "The hydration is severe but manageable with oral rehydration and monitoring. Not immediately life-threatening if we take precautions." "Then she stays," Brennan said, his tone brooking no argument. "Corporal Garrison, you'll remain under medical observation for the next 6 hours. Drink this." He handed her a liter of electrolyte solution. "All of it. Now. That's not a request." Elle drank, and the liquid tasted like salvation mixed with chemicals. Her body absorbed it desperately, cells crying out for the hydration they'd been denied. Brennan turned to Van Horn, his expression carved from glacier ice. "Lieutenant, a word. In private. Now." They walked away from the group, out of easy earshot. Elle couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Van Horn's face go from red to white in the space of 30 seconds. Saw Brennan's finger jabbing toward his chest, saw the lieutenant take a step back like he'd been physically struck. When they returned 5 minutes later, Van Horn wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "New orders," Brennan announced to the assembled team. "I'll be accompanying you for the remainder of this exercise. Direct oversight and evaluation. Consider this a full command review of training protocols." The message was clear as crystal. The game had changed, and someone had just raised the stakes considerably. That night, after Elle had rehydrated and regained her strength, Brennan assembled the entire team in a loose circle. The sun was setting, turning the desert into shades of copper and blood, painting shadows that made everyone look like warriors from an ancient time. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying natural authority that needed no amplification. "I've been a Navy SEAL for 40 years. I've served with the finest warriors this country has ever produced, from Vietnam-era frogmen to the modern operators who took down bin Laden. And I've learned something in those 4 decades. He paused, letting the silence stretch, making them wait. "The measure of a warrior isn't strength or speed or even courage. It's what they do when everything's against them, when the mission is impossible, when their body is breaking down, when the people who should have their back are actively trying to make them fail." His gaze swept across the team, settling on each face with uncomfortable precision. 3 days ago, Corporal Garrison's water supply was sabotaged. Not damaged through use, deliberately sabotaged. A clean cut sealed with adhesive designed to fail under pressure. I know this because I examined the evidence personally and had it analyzed. Murmurs rippled through the team like wind across sand. Van Horn's face was stone, but Elle saw his jaw muscles jumping. Since then, she's operated on minimal water in conditions that have medevaced 2 experienced operators with more desert training. She's neutralized an Op-4 team single-handedly using tactics that would have impressed any instructor. She's shot a 3.8-inch group at 800 yards while suffering heat stress that would incapacitate most of you. Brennan's voice grew harder, colder, more dangerous. Some of you have been testing her. That's acceptable. New operators earn their place through performance under pressure. But some of you cross the line from testing to sabotage. That ends now. Tonight. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, Elle's audio recorder, and her heart skipped a beat seeing it in his hand. This was placed in Lieutenant Van Horn's possession 3 days ago. I've listened to the recordings. They contain evidence of conspiracy to cause deliberate harm to a team member. Orders to Op-4 to target a specific operator with intent to force medical evacuation. Plans to induce dehydration through equipment sabotage. Van Horn stood abruptly, his face flushed. That's illegal surveillance. That's evidence of criminal conduct, Brennan snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Sit down, Lieutenant. We're not done, and you'll stand when I tell you to stand. The authority in that command was absolute. Van Horn sat. Brennan looked at the team again, and Elle saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. I'm going to tell you something none of you know, something I've kept quiet because the operator in question asked me to. Master Chief Thomas Garrison was my best friend. We served together for 15 years. Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, operations that are still classified and ones that made the history books. He saved my life so many times, I lost count. The team went absolutely still. Every eye was on Brennan now, and Elle felt the weight of attention shift subtly in her direction. In November 2013, in Helmand Province, our team walked into an ambush. Taliban had us pinned in a valley with nowhere to go, no air support available, extraction impossible. Thomas took a position on high ground and provided covering fire so the rest of us could reach the LZ. He was hit 3 times but kept shooting, kept buying us time. Bought us the minutes we needed to reach the helicopters and get clear. Brennan's voice roughened with old grief that had never fully healed. I was the last one with him before the extract. He knew he wasn't making it out. His weapon was nearly empty. He was bleeding from multiple hits, and the Taliban were closing in. His last words were about his daughter. He made me promise 2 things. He paused, and the silence was absolute. First, make sure she gets no special treatment if she follows him into this life. No favoritism, no shortcuts, no easy path because of who her father was. She would earn her place on her own merits, or she would fail honestly. Second, make sure nobody breaks her through malice instead of fair training. That I destroy anyone who tried to abuse her instead of test her properly. Brennan's eyes found Elle across the circle. I've kept both promises. Corporal Garrison has received no favoritism from me. I've watched her struggle, watched her suffer, watched her accumulate injuries that made me want to break bones. But I did nothing to ease her path because that's what her father wanted. Proof that she could earn her place without special treatment. He turned back to the team, and his expression was carved from something harder than stone. But I also promised I'd destroy anyone who tried to break her through sabotage instead of honest evaluation. Lieutenant Van Horn, you crossed that line. You didn't wash her out through proper standards. You tried to injure her into medical evacuation through deliberate sabotage. Chief Callahan, you crossed it too, until you remembered what Thomas Garrison's friendship and sacrifice meant. Callahan nodded slowly, accepting the judgment without flinching. Here's what happens now, Brennan continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Lieutenant Van Horn, you're under arrest. Military police will take you into custody when we return to base. Charges include assault, conspiracy to cause bodily harm, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Chief Callahan, you'll provide testimony about everything you witnessed and participated in. The rest of you will be interviewed by NCIS about your knowledge of and participation in these activities. Shock rippled through the team like a physical wave. Van Horn looked like he'd been gutted, his face pale in the fading light. "Sir, this is political correctness run amok," he started. "This is justice for deliberate harm to a team member," Brennan said, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. "You didn't evaluate her fairly. You didn't maintain proper standards. You know what Thomas Garrison would do if he were here? If he saw what you did to his daughter? He'd beat you within an inch of your life, then drag you before a court-martial himself and testify against you with a smile. I'm a more civilized man than Thomas was. You should be grateful for that mercy." Van Horn said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. Brennan turned to Elle, his expression softening slightly. "Corporal Garrison, stand up." Else, the kind of regard that had to be earned through blood and stubbornness. "Yes, sir, I can complete the mission." "Then you will. 4 more days. We continue the exercise as planned. Lieutenant Van Horn will be confined and escorted by military police who will arrive tomorrow morning. The rest of you will complete your training. And at the end of this, when we return to base, everyone will know exactly what Corporal Garrison is capable of. Everyone will understand what Thomas Garrison's legacy really means." He looked around the circle one final time. "Thomas Garrison was the finest warrior I ever served with. Watching his daughter prove she inherited every bit of his steel has been the proudest moment of my 40-year career. If any of you have a problem with that, speak now and we'll settle it immediately." Silence, heavy and absolute. "Good. Dismissed. Get some rest. We move." Your willingness to fight the right way instead of taking shortcuts or compromising your principles. "Thank you, sir. But Elle," he used her first name for the first time, and somehow that felt more significant than all the praise. "You don't have to prove anything else. You've earned your place 10 times over. If you want to accept medevac for the dehydration, nobody who matters would question it." Elle shook her head with absolute certainty. 4 more days, sir. I finish what I start. That's what he taught me." Brennan smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, and waited with understanding. "Yeah, you're definitely Thomas's daughter, stubborn as hell and twice as tough." He pulled something from his pocket, a photograph creased and worn from years of carrying. 2 young men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like they owned the world and knew all its secrets. "Desert Storm, 1991. We just survived an ambush that should have killed us both. Thomas pulled me out of a burning vehicle under fire. I returned the favor 2 days later when we got pinned down. That's when we became brothers, not just teammates." Elle stared at the photograph, seeing her father young and alive and invincible, the way she'd never known him, but always imagined. "I've carried this for 33 years, Brennan said softly. "Through every deployment, every mission, every dark moment when I questioned whether I had the strength to continue. It reminded me that some bonds transcend blood. He was my brother, which makes you family, Elle, which means I'll protect you the same way he protected me." He held out the photograph with deliberate care. "I think he'd want you to have it now." Elle took it with trembling hands, her vision blurring. "Sir, I can't." "You can and you will. Consider it payment for finishing what he started, for proving that legacy matters and blood tells." Brennan's voice was gentle but firm. "Just finish this mission. Show them what Thomas Garrison's daughter is really made of. 4 more days." That night, Elle lay under the stars with the photograph pressed against her chest, and for the first time in 11 years, she felt her father's presence, like something real and close. Not a ghost or a memory or a burden of expectation, something more solid, something that felt like blessing. The desert wind whispered across the sand, carrying secrets and promises. 4 more days. She could do 4 more days, and then the real mission would begin. Part 3. The Legacy Shot. The helicopter touched down at Bagram Airfield 48 hours after Elle and Team 7 returned from the Chocolate Mountains. The desert training had ended exactly as Commander Brennan predicted. Elle had completed all objectives, earned grudging respect from operators who'd started the week hostile, and emerged from 7 days of hell with her head high and her record clean. Lieutenant Van Horn was in military custody, facing court-martial. 3 other officers across the SEAL community had been implicated in the wider investigation into systematic harassment. The news had spread through naval special warfare like wildfire. Commander Brennan had gone to war against abuse in the ranks, and he'd won decisively. But none of that mattered right now. Elle stood in a briefing room that smelled like stale coffee and aviation fuel, staring at satellite imagery of a compound in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The air conditioning hummed with mechanical efficiency, a stark contrast to the brutal heat she'd endured for 7 days. Her body had recovered, rehydration, rest, medical clearance. Her mind was sharp and focused, already calculating angles and distances. The man at the front of the room was a CIA officer who looked like he'd spent too many years in places that didn't appear on official maps. His name was irrelevant, just another face in a long line of intelligence professionals who tasked operators with missions that couldn't be acknowledged. His mission brief, however, was everything. "High-value target," he said without preamble, pointing to a photograph on the screen. "Taliban commander Omar Khalid, responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces across 3 provinces over the past 18 months. Intelligence indicates he's planning a major operation against the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. Timeline, 72 hours or less." The photograph showed a man in his 50s with a hard face carved by decades of war, cold eyes that had seen empires come and go, a distinctive scar along his jaw. A warrior who'd been fighting since the Soviets invaded in the 80s, who'd survived everything America had thrown at him. "Target location is here." The officer zoomed in on the compound with practiced efficiency. "Mountain Valley, Hindu Kush, elevation 9,500 feet, remove, defensible, and he knows we're looking for him. Security is tight, trained fighters, overlapping fields of fire, early warning systems. Direct assault would result in unacceptable casualties and likely allow the target to escape." He looked at Team 7, his gaze settling on Elle. "This requires precision, long-range elimination with zero room for error. The shot will be extremely difficult, over 2,000 yards, high altitude affecting ballistics, unpredictable wind conditions in mountain valleys. We need the best sniper available, and according to Commander Brennan's recent evaluations, that's Corporal Garrison." Every eye in the room turned to Elle, and she felt the weight of expectation like physical pressure. The CIA officer continued, his voice carefully neutral. "There's one more complication you need to be aware of. The compound is located in the same valley where Master Chief Thomas Garrison was killed in action, November 2013. Approximately 600 meters from the exact position where he made his final stand." The room went silent as a tomb. Elle felt something shift inside her, a tectonic movement of emotion she'd been holding back for 11 years. Her father had died in that valley, had bled out on that ground, had spent his last moments looking at those same mountains while buying time for his team to escape. "Corporal Garrison," the officer said, his tone respectful. "Given the personal history, this is entirely voluntary. Nobody would question if you decline this mission. We can find another shooter." Elle stood, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion raging beneath the surface. I volunteer, sir. No hesitation. L. Commander Brennan's voice from the back of the room, quiet but firm. She turned to face him, and she saw the war in his eyes, the desire to protect her warring with the knowledge that this was exactly what she trained for her entire life. This moment, this mission. Sir, with respect, this is why I'm here. This is what he trained me for. I'm the best shooter in this room, and we both know it. The mission requires precision. I can deliver that precision. Brennan held her gaze for a long moment, and Elle saw something in his expression that looked like pride mixed with fear. Finally, he nodded with visible reluctance. Approved, but I'm going in as Overwatch and tactical advisor, non-negotiable. Sir, you're retired from active duty. I'm contracted as senior advisor to Naval Special Warfare, which gives me operational latitude for high-risk missions requiring experienced leadership. His voice hardened into something that brooked no argument. Your father died in that valley while I made it out. I'm not losing you there too. Those are my terms. Accept them or I pull my recommendation. The CIA officer glanced between them, reading the dynamic, then nodded. Commander Brennan's presence is acceptable. Frankly, having someone with his experience on Overwatch is an asset. He pulled up a tactical map on the screen. Insertion in 18 hours. Halo jump from 28,000 feet to avoid radar detection. Land 18 miles from target to minimize noise signature. Approach on foot through hostile territory. Establish hide position with clear line of sight. Wait for target window. Intelligence suggests Khalid appears on the compound's second-floor balcony each morning between 0530 and 0600. Rules of engagement are weapons-free once positive ID is confirmed. His eyes found L again, and his expression was grave. One shot, Corporal. You won't get two. The sound will alert security, and the target will disappear into the compound. If you miss, Khalid vanishes, and a lot of Americans die in an embassy attack we could have prevented. Understood? Understood, sir. One shot. I won't miss. 18 hours gave Elle time to prepare in ways that went beyond equipment checks. She spent 2 hours in the armory, hand-loading ammunition for the M2010 ESR, with the kind of meticulous care her father had taught her. The .300 Winchester Magnum rounds had to be perfect, precisely measured powder charges weighed to the tenth of a grain, match-grade bullets seated to exact depth and checked for concentricity. Each cartridge weighed individually to ensure consistency. Chief Derek Callahan appeared beside her workbench, watching her work with professional appreciation. Your father taught you to hand-load? He said factory ammunition was for people who didn't care about the difference between good enough and perfect. Elle held a completed round up to the light, examining it for microscopic imperfections that could affect flight characteristics. Every tenth of a grain of powder matters at extreme range. Every thousandth of an inch in seating depth. The difference between a hit and a miss at 2,000 yards can come down to details most people can't even measure. I'll be your spotter on this one, Callahan said, his voice quiet, if you'll have me after everything that happened. Elle looked at him, seeing the genuine contrition in his expression. After everything, you're one of the few people I trust with this, Chief. You proved yourself when it mattered. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Elle loading ammunition with practiced precision, Callahan cleaning and calibrating the Schmidt and Bender scope that would give her eyes at extreme distance. 2,400 yards, Callahan said finally, breaking the silence. That's beyond standard engagement range for this weapon system. Wind at that altitude is unpredictable. Temperature differential will affect bullet drop. You're talking about a shot that shouldn't be possible under ideal conditions, much less in combat. My father made impossible shots all the time. It's in the blood. Your father was the best I ever saw. Callahan set down the scope with careful reverence. But even he paused, then continued in a voice weighted with memory. The last year before he deployed to Afghanistan, he called me out of nowhere, asked if I wanted to help him with a specialized training exercise. We spent 3 weeks in the Arizona desert, setting up complex scenarios. 2 targets at extreme range, 8-second engagement window, mountain wind conditions. He made me run the same drill dozens of times, always pushing for faster transitions, more precise wind calls. Elle's hands stilled on the cartridge she was loading. He was preparing for something specific. He knew that valley was dangerous, knew the Taliban had it zeroed in, knew the mission profile had significant risk factors. I think, Callahan's voice roughened with emotion he wasn't quite hiding. I think he knew he might not come back from that deployment, and he wanted to make sure the mission could be completed, even if it took 11 years and required his daughter to finish what he started. Elle set down the cartridge with trembling hands. He trained me on that exact scenario. 2 targets, extreme range, mountain wind, rapid transition. I thought it was just advanced practice, pushing my skills to the theoretical limit. Thomas Garrison didn't do anything without purpose. Every training session had a reason. Every skill he taught was aimed at mission completion. Callahan met her eyes. He was teaching you to finish his fight. He saw his own death coming and prepared you to complete the mission a decade later. The magnitude of that settled over Elle like a physical weight that could have crushed her, but instead made her feel more grounded, more certain. Her father had seen his own death coming and had prepared her to complete his mission 11 years in the future. The weight of that legacy could destroy someone who wasn't ready for it. Elle was ready. "Then I won't fail him," she said with absolute conviction. "Whatever it takes, I complete this mission." She loaded 20 rounds with painstaking care, 19 for practice in zeroing the rifle to her specific shooting position. One special round for the shot that would matter most, and that one was already loaded, had been for 11 years, waiting for this exact moment. At midnight, Elle found Commander Brennan on the flight line, staring up at the mountains barely visible against the night sky, his silhouette dark against the ambient light of the airfield. "Can't sleep either?" he asked without turning. "Too much adrenaline, too much history." Brennan nodded slowly, understanding in the gesture. "I remember the night before we inserted into that valley 11 years ago. Thomas couldn't sleep either. We sat up talking about everything and nothing. Families, deployments, the future. He showed me pictures of you on his phone. Said you just turned 13, already out shooting boys twice your age at the local range. He always believed in me more than I believed in myself. That's what fathers do, especially fathers who know they might not be around to see their children grow up." Brennan's voice was soft with old pain. He knew that mission was high risk. We all did. The intelligence was thin, the terrain favored the enemy, and the Taliban had been operating in that valley for decades. But we had our orders, and SEALs don't refuse missions because they're dangerous. Elle stood beside him, both of them watching the darkness where mountains lurked. Did he know he was going to die? I think he knew it was possible. We walked into that valley, and it felt wrong from the first step. Too quiet, too empty. The kind of silence that means someone's watching and waiting. Brennan's jaw tightened with memory. The ambush hit us from 3 sides simultaneously. Perfect coordination, overlapping fields of fire. They'd been waiting for us, knew exactly where we'd be. Thomas took high ground immediately, started laying down suppressing fire that gave us the time we needed to organize and move toward the extraction point. His voice grew rougher. I tried to go back for him, ordered the team to hold position while I flanked around to provide support. He countermanded that order, told me in no uncertain terms to get the team to safety, said he could hold them off long enough for extract. I was his commander. I could have overruled him. Brennan's hands clenched into fists. Instead, I followed his last order because he was right, and we both knew it. One man in a defensive position with superior firepower could hold that gap long enough for 7 men to reach the LZ. 2 men would just mean 2 casualties instead of 1. So I left him there, listened to him die over the radio while the helicopter lifted off. Elle said nothing, because there was nothing to say that could absolve that kind of guilt or honor that kind of sacrifice. For 11 years, I've lived with that decision, Brennan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Knowing I left my best friend to die alone on a mountain. Knowing his daughter grew up without a father because I chose to save the team instead of him. Tomorrow, you're going into that valley. You're going to see the ground where he fell, and you're going to complete the mission he started. He turned to face her, and Elle saw tears tracking down his face in the dim light. I need you to know something. If the shot doesn't present itself, if conditions aren't right, if there's any doubt at all, we abort. Your father wouldn't want you to die trying to finish his work. He'd want you to live, to have a future, to find peace. With respect, sir, Elle's voice was gentle but firm. I think that's exactly what he'd want. Legacy matters more than survival. Completing the mission matters more than one operator's life. That's what he taught me. Brennan's laugh was bitter as ashes. You're definitely his daughter. Same stubborn certainty that the mission comes first, that honor matters more than survival. He pulled something from his pocket, a small object wrapped in cloth, with the careful reverence usually reserved for religious relics. Thomas gave this to me the night before we inserted 11 years ago. Said if he didn't make it back, I should hold on to it until you were old enough to understand what it meant. Elle unwrapped the cloth with trembling hands. Inside was a single bullet, a .300 Winchester Magnum round identical to the one she'd loaded earlier. But this one was engraved with tiny letters that must have taken hours of painstaking work. For Elle, finish the fight. Love, Dad. Her vision blurred, and she didn't try to stop the tears this time. He knew. He knew. Brennan's voice was rough, with shared grief. He knew exactly what he was doing, buying time for his team, training his daughter for the mission he wouldn't survive to complete. Thomas Garrison planned 11 years ahead, prepared for every contingency. That's the kind of warrior he was. Elle closed her fingers around the bullet, feeling the engraved metal against her palm. I'll make the shot, sir. For him, for the team he saved, for everyone who'll die if Khalid succeeds. I know you will. Brennan's expression was complicated, pride and fear and old grief all mixed together. But promise me something. Promise me that if you can't make the shot, you'll come home alive. Your father's legacy isn't worth your life. Elle met his eyes and her voice was absolutely certain. My father's legacy is exactly what my life is worth, sir. It's the only thing that gives my life meaning. The C-17 climbed to 28,000 feet, and the world below became an abstraction of shadows and starlight, reality reduced to the essentials of mission and purpose. Elle sat in full jump gear, oxygen mask feeding her breathable air in the thin atmosphere, parachute pack configured for halo insertion, weapons and equipment strapped tight against her body with the kind of careful precision that separated successful operations from catastrophic failures. Around her, Team 7 prepared in focused silence. These were men who'd made hundreds of combat jumps, but every jump carried the possibility of death. Equipment failure, mid-air collision, landing in hostile territory, oxygen system malfunction. The risks were cataloged and accepted as the price of admission. Elle ran through her mental checklist one final time. Primary parachute, reserve parachute, oxygen system, altimeter, GPS, night vision goggles. The M2010 was broken down and secured in a weapons case strapped to her leg. Every piece of gear had been checked 3 times, because the 4th time was when you caught the mistake that would save your life. The jump light turned red, 2 minutes to exit. Brennan appeared beside her, his own gear configured for the jump despite being 62 years old. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this so many times it had become as natural as breathing. Stay tight in the stack, he said over the roar of wind, already beginning to howl through the aircraft. Hypoxia is a silent killer at this altitude. Watch your oxygen levels. If you feel lightheaded or disoriented, signal immediately. Yes, sir. The light turned green. Go, go, go! Elle stepped into nothing, and the world became wind and darkness, and the absolute freedom of controlled falling. The slipstream hit like a physical blow, spinning her in the jet wash before she stabilized her body position. Around her, other jumpers fell in tight formation, dark shapes against darker sky. At 28,000 feet, the temperature was 40 degrees below zero. Without the oxygen mask and protective equipment, she'd be unconscious in seconds, dead in minutes. She fell through clouds made of ice crystals that glittered in the starlight like diamonds scattered across velvet. The altimeter on her wrist counted down with mechanical precision. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. At 5,000 feet, she pulled her ripcord with practiced timing. The parachute deployed with a sharp crack of fabric, decelerating her from terminal velocity to a manageable descent that felt almost gentle after the violence of freefall. Around her, other chutes blossomed in the darkness like strange flowers blooming in hostile soil. The ground rose to meet her with patient inevitability. Elle hit, rolled with the impact, came up with weapon ready, scanning for threats through night vision that turned the world into shades of green. The landing zone was clear, rocky ground, sparse vegetation, mountains rising like teeth against the sky. The team assembled in silence with the practiced efficiency of professionals who'd done this dance before. No casualties, no injuries. A perfect insertion into hostile territory. Brennan appeared beside Elle, checking her gear with quick competence. 18 miles to target, 22-hour approach through enemy territory. Move quiet, move careful, assume everything wants to kill you. They moved out in tactical column, spacing 10 meters apart, navigating by GPS and the kind of terrain association that came from years of operating in mountains. The terrain was brutal. Steep inclines covered in loose scree that could betray position with a single misstep. Elevation that made breathing difficult even for operators in peak condition. Elle carried 70 pounds of gear, including the disassembled M2010, ammunition, water, survival equipment, and the 1,000 small items that kept people alive in places designed to kill them. The weight felt lighter than it should, carried on shoulders strengthened by purpose. Hour after hour, they moved through the darkness, like ghosts passing through a world that didn't quite acknowledge their existence. The mountains were ancient and indifferent, having watched empires rise and fall and caring about neither. Somewhere in these valleys, the Soviets had bled against the Mujahideen. Somewhere closer, her father had died buying time for men who'd survived to tell his story. At dawn, they stopped to rest in a rocky outcrop that provided concealment and overwatch. Callahan pulled out energy bars and passed them around with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Elle ate mechanically, fuel for a body that would need every calorie in the hours ahead. 10 miles to target, Callahan said quietly, checking his GPS. We're making excellent time. Through the growing light, Elle could see the valley spread below them, like a map drawn in shadows in stone. Somewhere down there, a compound held a man who planned to kill Americans. And somewhere down there, a piece of ground held the last of her father's blood. Let's keep moving, she said, her voice steady. I want to be in position before full light. By 1800 hours, they were in position. The hide site was a rocky overhang with clear sight lines to the compound below, positioned to give maximum concealment while providing the angle needed for the shot. Distance measured by laser rangefinder, 2,415 yards, almost a mile and a half, at the very edge of what was possible with the rifle and ammunition Elle carried. She and Callahan separated from the main team, crawling the last 200 yards to their final position with agonizing slowness. Every movement was calculated to avoid detection, disturbing vegetation, creating silhouettes, leaving tracks that would betray their presence. Elle dug into the hide site with meticulous care, scraping out a shallow depression that would position her body at the correct angle, covering herself with local rocks and vegetation. The camouflage had to be perfect. One suspicious shadow, and the target would never appear, the mission would fail, and Khalid would disappear to plan attacks that would kill her countrymen. Callahan settled beside her with the spotting scope, a high-powered Leupold that would give them detailed observation of the target area. "Range confirmed," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. 2415 yards. Elevation 9,500 feet. This is going to be interesting. L assembled the M2010 with practiced efficiency that came from hundreds of repetitions. Barrel, action, stock, scope, each piece fitted together with mechanical precision. She loaded her father's bullet into the chamber, feeling the engraved metal slide home with a click that sounded like destiny. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope, the compound resolved into sharp detail, despite the extreme distance. Two-story structure, mud brick construction, armed guards on the perimeter moving in patterns that suggested professional training, windows that could hide 100 threats, and somewhere inside, Omar Khalid, planning death for people who'd never see him coming. "Now we wait," Callahan said, with the patience that separated professional snipers from amateurs. 40 hours. That's how long they waited in that hide site, barely moving, eating minimally, pissing into bottles to avoid compromising position. The temperature swung from 95 degrees during the day to 40 at night. Elle's muscles cramped, her joints ached, and none of it mattered because this was the mission, and missions demanded sacrifice. She was her father's daughter. She could wait. On the second morning, as dawn painted the mountains copper and gold, Callahan stiffened with sudden alertness. "Movement. Second floor balcony. Stand by for positive ID." Elle shifted the rifle fractionally, bringing the scope to bear with movements so small they were almost invisible. A man stepped into view, 50s, hard face carved by decades of war, distinctive scar along his jaw. The photograph from the briefing came to life in her cross. "Positive ID," Callahan confirmed, his voice tight. "That's Khalid." Elle's heart rate was 62 beats per minute, elevated but controlled. Her breathing was steady, pulling oxygen from air that was thin at this altitude. "Wait," Callahan said urgently, second subject approaching. Another man stepped onto the balcony. Younger, Caucasian features, definitely not Taliban. Civilian clothes, but military bearing visible in his posture. Russian, Elle guessed, based on intelligence reports of foreign advisors. 2 targets, Callahan said, and Elle heard the calculation in his voice. Window is approximately 8 seconds before they separate. After that, Khalid will be inside and will lose the shot. 8 seconds, 2 targets, over 2,000 yards. Exactly what her father had trained her for 11 years ago. "Feed me data," Elle said, her voice absolutely calm. Callahan's voice became clinical, professional, the kind of detached competence that came from doing something so many times that emotion became irrelevant. "Range 2415 yards, elevation 9,500 feet, air density is 68% of sea level. Temperature 72 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 12%, wind." He paused, watching vegetation in the spotting scope, analyzing mirage patterns. "Wind is 16 miles per hour, gusting to 24, 7 o'clock. Variable. This is going to be difficult." Elle ran the calculations with a mind trained for exactly this kind of mathematical problem. At this range, bullet drop would be 653 inches, 54 feet. The bullet would fall the height of a 5-story building before it reached the target. Wind drift at 16 miles per hour would push the bullet 138 inches left, 11.5 feet sideways. Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth affecting bullet trajectory over extreme distances, would drift around 12.6 inches right. Spin drift from the rifle's barrel twist rate, 9 inches right. Total windage adjustment needed, 127 inches left. Almost 11 feet of hold-off to compensate for forces most people didn't even know existed. Elle's hands moved on the turrets, clicking in the corrections with mechanical precision. Each click was 1/4 MOA, minute of angle. The math became meditation, numbers becoming certainty. Targets are talking, Callahan said, his voice urgent now. Estimate 6 seconds before separation. 5, 4. Elle's breathing stopped between heartbeats. Her pulse was 58. The crosshairs settled on center mass, accounting for every variable, every force that would try to push her bullet off course. The world narrowed to a circle of glass no bigger than her pupil. Everything outside that circle ceased to exist. No mountains, no past, no future. Just crosshairs and target and the space between heartbeats where perfection lived. Her father's voice in her memory. Let the world fade. Just you, the rifle, and the target. The trigger broke clean with 3.5 pounds of pressure. The rifle spoke, and the universe held its breath. Recoil drove back into her shoulder with familiar force. Through the scope, Elle tracked the shot with a trick of perception that shouldn't be possible, but every sniper claimed to experience. Watching the bullet's path despite physics saying it was invisible. 4.2 seconds of flight time. The bullet traveled supersonic for 1,800 yards, then dropped below the speed of sound, its trajectory becoming less predictable as it shed velocity. Impact. Khalid's head snapped back, a red mist blooming where his skull had been. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, dead before his body registered the damage. The Russian froze for a fraction of a second, shocked, his brain trying to process what his eyes had just witnessed. Elle was already working the bolt with smooth efficiency, ejecting the spent casing from her father's bullet, chambering her second round, the one she'd loaded herself that morning. The Russian started to move, survival instincts overriding shock, diving for cover that would save him. Elle led the target, compensating for his movement, adjusting for wind that had shifted 2 miles per hour in the last 4 seconds. Her breath was held. Her pulse was 54. Her finger was already pressing through the trigger brake. The rifle fired again. 4.3 seconds of flight time. The Russian was mid-stride when the bullet found him, center mass, punching through his chest with hydrostatic shock that shut down his nervous system instantly. He collapsed beside Khalid, 2 bodies on a balcony where moments before, 2 men had been planning murder. 2 shots, 2 kills, 2,415 yards, in 6.1 seconds total. Holy Mother of God, Callahan whispered, his voice full of awe and disbelief. I've never seen anything like that in 20 years of combat operations. The compound erupted in chaos below them, guards running in confusion, weapons firing blindly at nothing as they tried to identify a threat they couldn't see. They had no idea that death had reached out from almost 1.5 miles away, no concept of the precision required to make those shots. Targets eliminated, Elle said into her radio, her voice steady despite adrenaline screaming through every nerve. Recommend immediate extract. Brennan's voice came back, rough with emotion that professional discipline couldn't quite mask. Confirmed. 2 tangos down. Extract in 60 seconds. Outstanding work, Corporal. Your father would be... His voice broke, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They collapsed the hide site with practiced efficiency, grabbed their gear, and melted back into the rocks like ghosts returning to whatever realm they'd emerged from. The team was already moving, covering their withdrawal with the kind of professional precision that came from doing extracts under fire. 2 hours later, they were aboard the extraction helicopter, climbing away from the mountains that had taken her father and given him back in a different form. Elle sat with the M2010 across her lap, the spent casing from her father's bullet held carefully in her hand. Brennan sat beside her, his eyes red-rimmed but dry, carrying the weight of 11 years of grief that had finally found something like resolution. Your father made that exact shot in training, he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. 2 targets, 8-second window, extreme range and mountain conditions. He did it 17 times in a row over 3 weeks, said that when the real moment came, muscle memory would take over and the shot would feel automatic. He was right. He was always right about the things that mattered. Brennan pulled out his phone, showed Ellie a photograph from the drone that had been providing overwatch. Both targets confirmed deceased. Khalid's death will save American lives. Maybe dozens, maybe hundreds. We'll never know exactly how many, but the intelligence guys estimate he was planning something that would have killed at least 50 people. Elle stared at the image. 2 bodies on a balcony. Life ended with precision from a distance that shouldn't allow for such certainty. 600 meters from where Dad died. I know. We flew over the site on extract. I saw the rocks where he made his stand, saw the position he held for those final minutes. Brennan's voice cracked slightly despite his attempt at control. Your father bought us time to escape, and 11 years later his daughter completed the mission from the same valley using skills he taught her. That's not just symmetry, Elle. That's legacy made real. She looked down at the spent casing, reading the engraved words one more time through blurred vision. Finish the fight. Love, Dad. Mission complete, she whispered to the brass, to the memory, to the ghost that had haunted her for 11 years. Mission complete, Dad. 2 months later, Elle stood in the White House East Room, wearing her dress uniform that had been pressed to within an inch of its life, while the President of the United States placed the Navy Cross around her neck with the careful reverence the moment deserved. For extraordinary heroism in direct combat operations against enemy forces, the citation read in formal language that couldn't quite capture the reality of what had happened. Corporal Eleanor Garrison displayed exceptional courage, skill, and tactical acumen in executing a precision engagement against high-value enemy combatants at extreme range under adverse conditions. Her actions directly resulted in the neutralization of a confirmed terrorist leader responsible for planning attacks against United States personnel and facilities. Her performance reflects great credit upon herself and upholds the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. The President shook her hand with a grip that was firm and genuine. Your father earned the Medal of Honor in the same valley where you completed this mission. The symmetry is remarkable. He would be extraordinarily proud of you. Thank you, Mr. President. The ceremony was brief, professional, carefully choreographed for the cameras in the historical record. Elle was grateful when it ended. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd finally paid a debt that had been accumulating interest for 11 years. Like someone who could finally breathe without the weight of incomplete business crushing her chest. Outside the White House, Commander Brennan waited, now wearing civilian clothes and looking somehow diminished without the uniform he'd worn for 4 decades. He'd officially retired 3 weeks earlier, his final service to the Navy complete. How does it feel? He asked, as they walked through the Rose Garden where tourists took photographs and pretended to understand the weight of the building behind them. Strange, final, like I've been running towards something my whole life, and suddenly there's nothing ahead except open road. That's when new missions begin, when the old ones are finally complete. Brennan smiled, and it was the first genuinely relaxed expression Elle had ever seen on his face. Speaking of which, Naval Special Warfare wants you as Chief Sniper Instructor. Train the next generation of shooters. Pass on what Thomas taught you, what you've proven works at the highest level of competition. Elle considered that, turning the idea over in her mind. Teaching instead of operating? Trading trigger time for classroom time? Your father spent his last 5 years training others instead of taking missions himself. Said that legacy wasn't about personal glory. It was about building something that lasted beyond your own service, creating a foundation for warriors who'd come after. Brennan's expression was gentle with understanding. You've proven yourself in combat in ways that most operators never get the chance to demonstrate. Now prove that excellence can be taught, that standards don't need to be compromised to accommodate different body types or backgrounds, that your father's methods work for anyone willing to put in the work and embrace the discipline. It felt right in a way Elle couldn't quite articulate, completing the circle, finishing what her father had started not just in that Afghan valley, but in the larger mission of creating warriors who could carry the legacy forward. "I accept," she said. "When do I start?" 6 weeks. First class is already selected. 8 students. 2 are women who'll need to see what's possible when skill overcomes prejudice. 3 weeks later, Elle visited Arlington National Cemetery on a cold morning when frost covered the grass and her breath made clouds in the air. Her father's grave was in Section 60, where warriors from Iraq and Afghanistan rested under uniform white stones that stretched in precise rows toward a horizon that seemed infinite. She placed the Navy Cross beside his Medal of Honor, 2 pieces of metal representing 2 lives given to service, 2 missions completed in the same valley, 11 years apart. "Mission complete, Dad," she said aloud to the stone, to the ground, to whatever remained of the man who'd trained her for this exact moment. "Khalid's dead. The valley is clear. You can rest now." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of winter coming and old sacrifices that would never be forgotten. Behind her, footsteps approached on the frozen grass. Elle turned to see Derek Callahan in dress uniform, holding a small wooden box with careful reverence. "Thought you'd be here," he said quietly. "Wanted to give you something." Inside the box was a photograph, her father and a much younger Callahan, both in desert camouflage, both grinning at the camera with the kind of joy that came from surviving something that should have killed them. "Fallujah, 2004, was written on the back in faded ink. "He saved my life that day," Callahan said, his voice rough with old gratitude. "Pulled me from a burning vehicle while taking fire, carried me to safety when I couldn't walk. I dishonored that sacrifice by helping Van Horn hurt you. I'll regret that forever, carry that guilt until my last day. You made it right when it mattered, Chief. That's what counts." "Did I?" Callahan's expression was haunted. "I let it go on too long. Should have stopped it the first time Van Horn crossed the line. The first time I saw what was really happening." Elle looked at the photograph, at her father's young face full of life and certainty, and the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were. "Dad taught me that people make mistakes. What matters is what you do after you realize the mistake. You stood up. You testified." Van Horn got 7 years in Leavenworth, and 4 other officers were forced out of naval special warfare. You helped change the culture in ways that will protect operators for decades. Small redemption for large failure. It's enough. Elle held out her hand with deliberate formality. "Thank you for being my spotter in Afghanistan, for helping me finish his mission when it mattered most." Callahan shook her hand, then surprised her by pulling her into a brief, fierce hug that spoke of brotherhood and shared loss. "He was the best of us, the absolute best, and you're proof that greatness can be inherited, that legacy matters, that some debts can be paid across generations." When he left, Elle sat beside her father's grave for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky and thinking about missions and legacies and the strange way that time could circle back on itself. A young couple approached a nearby grave, a woman in army uniform, a man holding a small child who couldn't be more than 2 years old. The woman knelt, placing flowers with hands that trembled slightly, her voice too quiet to hear, but her grief obvious in every line of her body. Elle understood completely. The wars never really ended. They just created new generations of people visiting graves, new circles of grief that rippled outward through time. But they also created new generations of warriors, people who'd learned from the sacrifices, who carried the lessons forward, who made the hard choices because someone had to, and they'd been trained for exactly that burden. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brennan. "First class roster is finalized. 3 women, 5 men, all highly qualified, all incredibly determined. They'll need a teacher who understands what it takes at the highest level. You ready for this?" Elle typed back with steady fingers. "Ready. See you in 6 weeks." She stood, brushed frost and grass from her uniform with automatic precision, and walked back toward the parking lot where her car waited. Behind her, her father's grave stood silent and proud among thousands of others who'd paid the same price for the same cause. The sun was setting over the Potomac, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that looked like fire frozen in the moment before it consumed everything. Elle drove back toward Coronado, already planning the first week's curriculum for the students she'd be training. Fundamentals, she decided. Her father had always said that fundamentals mattered more than anything fancy or complicated. Breath control, trigger press, natural point of aim, mental discipline, the building blocks that made impossible shots possible, that turned potential into performance. In her glove compartment, wrapped in cloth with the reverent care usually reserved for religious relics, was the spent casing from her father's bullet, the one engraved with his final message. She'd carry it always, a reminder that some missions took years to complete, but were always worth finishing. Eleanor Garrison was 24 years old. She'd earned her place in naval special warfare through blood and stubbornness, and shots that shouldn't have been possible under any rational analysis of physics and probability. She'd completed her father's mission in the same valley where he died, using skills he'd taught her and ammunition he'd prepared 11 years before. Now she'd build her own legacy by teaching others what he'd taught her. The road stretched ahead into gathering darkness, and for the first time in 11 years, Elle felt something close to peace. Not happiness. Warriors who'd seen what she'd seen knew better than to expect happiness. But purpose, direction, the sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Her father had trained her for one perfect shot that would complete his mission. Now she'd train others for thousands of shots that would complete theirs. And somewhere, in whatever place warriors went when their service ended and their missions were complete, she hoped Thomas Garrison was watching. Hoped he could see what his daughter had become. Hoped he knew that his sacrifice hadn't been wasted, that his legacy lived on in ways he'd planned for, but never lived to see. Mission complete. Legacy secured. The fight continued. And Eleanor Garrison was ready for whatever came next.